Confess now, Mrs. Carter, and maybe this ends before your little girl hears about it." The words landed colder than the steel table between them. Grace Carter sat alone in a small interview room at the downtown precinct, her hands folded in front of her, trying to hide the red marks where the handcuffs had pressed too tightly during the ride. The room smelled faintly of old coffee, floor cleaner, and rain-soaked uniforms. A fluorescent light buzzed overhead, turning everything pale. The gray walls, the black camera in the corner, the silver necklace sealed in a plastic evidence bag near Officer Daniel Brooks's elbow. Grace stared at that necklace as if looking at a stranger's name on a hospital chart. She had never touched it. She had never even seen it before a store manager held it up in front of a crowd and called her a thief. Officer Brooks leaned back in his chair, broad shoulders filling out his Navy uniform, one hand resting on the folder he had dropped onto the table a minute earlier. He did not look angry anymore. That was what frightened Grace most. Anger could pass. This was something else, something polished and certain, the calm of a man who had already decided the ending and was only waiting for her to say the right line. "I didn't take anything," Grace said. Her voice was quiet, but it did not break. Brooks gave a small sigh, the kind people use when they think patience is a favor. "Mrs. Carter, the item was found in your purse." The store manager identified it. "Security called it in. We can make this simple, or we can make it hard." Grace swallowed. Behind the wall, she could hear phones ringing, shoes moving across tile, a printer coughing out paper somewhere in the hallway. Life kept going outside that door as if her name had not just been dragged through a shopping mall, as if her daughter's birthday gift was not still sitting unwrapped in a pink paper bag at the boutique counter, as if strangers had not lifted their phones while she stood there with her cheeks burning and her heart pounding. 3 hours earlier, she had only wanted to buy Lily a star-shaped hair clip. Nothing expensive, nothing glamorous, just a small silver clip with blue rhinestones because Lily had lost her front tooth 2 days before and told everyone she wanted to look like a movie star on her birthday. Grace had smiled when she heard that. She had parked on the 3rd level of the garage, walked past the pretzel stand, and entered Whitmore and Lane because the window display looked soft and bright, full of cream sweaters and pastel ribbons. She remembered the bell over the door. She remembered the manager's eyes lifting from behind the counter, measuring her in half a second and finding something she did not like. Now that same manager's accusation sat on the table in a plastic bag, pretending to be truth. Brooks tapped the evidence folder once. "You have no receipt for the necklace." "Because I didn't buy it. And you expect me to believe someone just placed it in your bag?" Grace looked up. For the first time since they had brought her in, her eyes held his without trembling. "Yes." Brooks almost smiled. Not fully, just enough to show disbelief. "That's convenient." The camera in the corner hummed silently. Grace wondered if anyone ever watched these recordings with real attention, or if they only became important after a life had already been damaged. She thought of Ethan. He would be leaving the federal building around now, unless his meeting ran late. He had kissed her forehead that morning while tying his daughter's shoelaces, smiling as Lily demanded pancakes shaped like hearts. Grace had teased him for checking the stove twice before leaving. Careful was his nature. Quiet was his habit. Most people saw his calm and mistook it for softness. They did not know what he noticed. They did not know the rooms he walked into for a living. Brooks slid a form across the table. "Write down what happened. Start with the moment you decided to take it." Grace did not touch the pen. That moment never happened. "Mrs. Carter, call my husband." Brooks paused, then leaned forward slightly. "Your husband isn't going to change the fact that stolen property was found in your possession." Grace's throat tightened, not from fear this time, but from the sharp ache of being spoken to like she was already erased. She could feel the cold table. Under her fingertips, the buzz of the light above her, the dry air in her lungs. Then she said, slowly and clearly, "Then call him anyway." Brooks studied her for a long second, as if trying to decide whether her calm was arrogance or shock. "What's his name?" "Ethan Carter." "And what does Mr. Carter do?" Grace looked at the necklace in the plastic bag, then at the black camera watching from the corner, then back at the officer who had not checked a single frame of mall security footage before putting her in this room. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper, but every word carried. "He protects people from men who confuse power with truth." The question about Ethan stayed in the air longer than Officer Brooks expected. For the first time, his pen stopped moving. Grace watched the shift, small but real, The tiny pause that comes when a person hears a door open somewhere behind the wall of their certainty. He recovered quickly, of course. Men like Brooks were good at that. He looked down at the form, clicked the pin twice, and said he would make the call when he was ready. But Grace had already drifted back to the moment when the day was still ordinary, when the only thing on her mind was finding the right birthday gift before the afternoon rain rolled in from the Charles River. The mall had smelled like cinnamon pretzels and new leather when she stepped through the glass doors. It was a Saturday crowd, families moving in slow waves, teenagers laughing near the escalators, a man in a Red Sox cap carrying 3 shopping bags and trying not to spill his coffee. Grace had parked on level 3 because Lily loved looking down through the garage railings at the tiny cars below, and even though Lily was not with her that morning, Grace still chose the same spot out of habit. She had $27 in cash, 1 debit card, and a small list folded in her coat pocket. Hair clip, birthday candles, strawberry frosting, and if there was enough left, a little blue notebook because Lily had recently decided she was going to become a writer, a veterinarian, and maybe the President of the United States, all before turning 10. Grace smiled at the thought as she passed a toy store window full of glittering plastic castles. She was not dressed for attention. Dark jeans, white sneakers, a tan sweater under a simple raincoat. Her wedding ring caught a line of light as she adjusted the strap of her purse, and for a second she thought about Ethan standing in their kitchen that morning, pretending not to worry about the grocery budget, while Lily practiced blowing out invisible candles at the table. Their life was not fancy, but it was careful, stitched together by small promises kept on ordinary days. Whitmore and Lane sat near the center atrium under a clean gold sign, the kind of store that seemed to lower its voice as soon as you entered. The window showed soft sweaters folded beside glass bowls of jewelry, ribbons arranged like little rivers of color, and a display of children's accessories near the back wall. Grace hesitated before going in. She had passed the store before and always assumed it was too expensive, but a small sign near the entrance read seasonal gifts under $15. That was enough hope to pull her through the door. A bell chimed overhead. Behind the white marble counter, Karen Whitmore looked up from a tablet. She was perfectly arranged, from her cream blazer to the smooth twist of her blonde hair. But her expression cooled the moment she saw Grace. It was not dramatic. It was worse than dramatic. It was practiced. A quick glance at the purse, the shoes, the coat, then the face. A full judgment delivered in silence. Grace offered a polite smile anyway. "Good morning," she said. Karen returned something that almost resembled a greeting, then looked past her toward a woman entering behind her with a designer bag over one arm. "Welcome in," Karen said brightly to the other customer, her voice suddenly warm enough to heat the room. Grace moved toward the children's display and told herself not to care. She had learned, slowly and painfully, that dignity sometimes meant refusing to hand strangers the power to change your breathing. The hair clips were arranged on a velvet tray beneath a small lamp. There were pink bows, pearl pins, gold butterflies, and finally the little star clip with blue rhinestones. It was smaller than she expected, delicate and cheerful, the kind of thing Lily would hold with both hands like treasure. Grace picked it up and checked the tag. $12. She let out a quiet breath of relief. That was when a young sales associate appeared beside her, nervous smile, name tag reading Melissa. She asked if Grace needed help finding anything. Grace said no, just this. Melissa nodded, but her eyes flicked toward the counter, where Karen was watching them through the reflection of a tall mirror. A few minutes later, Karen crossed the store and asked Grace if she wanted to try on one of the sale coats hanging near the fitting rooms. Grace almost refused, but the rain outside had been getting colder all week, and the coat on the rack had a red clearance tag. Karen lifted it from the hanger before Grace could answer. "Store policy," she said smoothly, "requires bags to stay outside the fitting room." Grace looked at the small sign by the door. It did say that. She placed her purse on the narrow shelf beside the fitting room entrance, careful, visible, ordinary. Melissa stood nearby folding scarves. Karen smiled. "Take your time." The fitting room smelled faintly of perfume and cedar hangers. Grace tried the coat on, saw immediately that the sleeves were too long, and laughed softly at herself in the mirror. It took less than 2 minutes. But outside the door, on the other side of that thin white wall, something quiet had already begun moving against her life. Outside the fitting room, Karen Whitmore moved with the calm precision of someone straightening a picture frame no one had noticed was crooked. Grace could not see her through the white-paneled door. She could only hear the soft click of hangers, the distant music from the mall atrium, and Melissa asking another customer whether she needed a smaller size. But the narrow shelf beside the fitting rooms held Grace's purse, and Karen stood over it for only a few seconds, long enough to turn her shoulder toward the mirror and block the view from the main floor. She had done that movement before, not with panic, not with hesitation, but with the smoothness of habit. From inside her blazer pocket, she took a small silver necklace with a blue stone pendant, still bright under the store lights. Its price tag had been removed. Its clasp was already open. Karen glanced once toward Melissa, who had her back turned, then once toward the ceiling where the old security dome stared uselessly at the front register. That camera had been broken for weeks, a fact she had repeated to staff so many times it had become part of the store's weather, like the cold air from the vent or the lemon scent of the floor polish. What Karen did not know was that corporate had sent a technician the evening before to install a small temporary camera above the fitting room hallway after 3 inventory disputes in the same month. It was tucked into a black smoke detector, angled down at the shelf, quiet and unnoticed. Karen slipped the necklace into the inside pocket of Grace's purse, pressed the flap closed, and stepped back just as the fitting room door opened. Grace came out holding the sale coat over one arm, smiling apologetically. "The sleeves are a little long," she said. Karen's face changed instantly, softening into customer service warmth so perfect it almost looked kind. "That happens with that cut," she said. "Let me take it for you." Grace thanked her and reached for her purse, but Karen's hand lifted slightly. "Just one moment, please." Grace stopped. The store seemed to shift around her. Melissa looked over from the scarf table. The other customer near the front lowered a bracelet back into its tray. Karen's eyes dropped to Grace's purse, then to the small archway that led back into the main sales floor. "Could you step this way for me?" she asked. Her voice was still polite, but the air beneath it had sharpened. Grace felt the first chill of confusion. "Is something wrong?" Karen did not answer right away. She walked toward the front of the store, and Grace followed because she had not done anything wrong, because innocent people often make the mistake of believing innocence will be obvious to everyone else. Near the entrance, just before the gold sign and the soft carpet gave way to the mall's bright tile, the security gate gave a sudden electronic chirp. Not loud, not dramatic, just a thin, repeating sound that made every head turn. Grace froze with one hand on her purse strap. Karen inhaled as if she had been personally disappointed. "Ma'am, I need to check your bag." Grace blinked. "My bag?" "Yes. Store policy." The same phrase again, polished and ready. Melissa's face lost color. Grace looked from Karen to the gate, then toward the children's display where the little star-shaped hair clip still rested on the counter beside the register. She had not even paid for it yet. She had carried nothing out. "I have not taken anything," Grace said. Karen extended her hand. "Then there should be no problem." It was the kind of sentence that sounds reasonable only when spoken by the person holding power. Grace felt warmth rise behind her eyes, but she handed over the purse because refusing would make her look guilty, and agreeing would not make her safe. Karen opened it slowly, making sure the customers could see. She moved aside a wallet, a folded grocery list, a small pack of tissues, Lily's missing tooth tucked inside a tiny plastic case, because Grace had promised to save it for the Tooth Fairy scrapbook. Then Karen's fingers stopped. She drew out the silver necklace by its chain, letting it catch the light. A murmur moved through the store. Grace stared at it, empty with disbelief. "That is not mine," she whispered. Karen held the necklace higher. "This item is from our locked display." Grace shook her head. "I never touched that. You had access to your bag." "No," Grace said, her voice still quiet but firmer now. "You asked me to leave it outside the fitting room." Karen's expression did not change, but something flickered in Melissa's eyes. A small hesitation. A silent memory. Karen turned toward the counter and picked up the phone. Grace heard the words retail theft, suspect detained, and police requested float across the marble and glass as if they belonged to someone else's life. Outside the store, shoppers slowed down. Someone lifted a phone. Someone else whispered. Grace stood beneath the warm boutique lights, holding nothing in her hands, while the little star hair clip waited by the register, small and blue and innocent, the only thing she had actually come to. But the police arrived faster than Grace expected, not because the situation was dangerous, but because Karen knew exactly which words made people hurry. Retail theft, refusing to cooperate, possible attempt to leave. Grace had done none of those things, yet the phrases moved through the air with uniforms behind them, heavy enough to bend a room around her. Officer Daniel Brooks entered first, broad and brisk, his rain jacket shining with small drops from the storm beginning outside. A younger officer followed him, glancing from Karen to Grace to the necklace in the evidence pouch Karen had already prepared, as if the store had been waiting for this scene long before Grace walked in. Karen stepped forward with the smooth sadness of someone pretending the truth had inconvenienced her. "Thank you for coming, officer," she said. "I hate to do this, but we have had a problem with theft recently." Brooks nodded before he had heard a single full sentence from Grace. That nod told her more than his words did. It told her he had already placed everyone in the room where he thought they belonged. Karen behind the counter, respectable and reliable. Grace near the security gate, suspicious and temporary. Grace straightened her shoulders. "Officer, I did not steal anything. My purse was outside the fitting room because she told me to leave it there." Brooks looked at Karen. "Store policy," Karen said quickly. "We ask customers to leave bags outside when trying on merchandise." "And the necklace?" Brooks asked. "Found in her purse," Karen replied. "From our locked display." Grace turned toward Melissa, who stood near the scarf table with both hands pressed around a folded sweater. Melissa had seen the purse on the shelf. She had seen Karen near it. Maybe not everything, but enough to question the neatness of the story. Their eyes met. Grace did not beg. She only looked at her, one human being asking another not to disappear when truth needed a witness. Melissa's lips parted, then closed again as Karen's gaze cut toward her. Brooks noticed the silence, but he did not follow it. He turned back to Grace. "Ma'am, I need you to come with us." Grace felt the store tilt slightly, though her feet stayed still. "Come with you where?" "To the precinct. We will sort it out there." "You can sort it out here," Grace said. "Please check the cameras." Karen folded her arms. "The front camera has been unreliable." Brooks did not even look up. "Then we will note that." Grace's voice sharpened by one careful degree. "There may be other cameras. The fitting room hallway. The mall corridor. The register." Brooks sighed through his nose, already tired of her details. "Ma'am, stolen merchandise was recovered from your bag. That gives us enough to proceed." Enough to proceed was not the same as enough to know. Grace understood that instantly, and the difference frightened her more than the uniform. Around them, the store had become a small theater. A woman in a green coat watched with one hand over her mouth. Two teenagers stood just outside the entrance, phones angled low but recording. The man from the Red Sox cap slowed near the doorway, his shopping bags hanging from one wrist. Grace could feel every eye, every guess, every silent headline being written without her name spelled correctly. Karen lowered her voice, but not enough. "We gave her a chance to make this right quietly." Grace turned to her. "That is not true." Brooks stepped between them, not touching Grace, but closing the space with authority. "Let us keep this calm." Grace looked at him, almost stunned by the word. Calm. She had been calm from the beginning. Calm when Karen searched her purse. Calm when strangers stared. Calm when someone called the police on a lie wrapped in store policy. But in that room, calm only counted when it came from the people accusing her. The younger officer shifted his weight. "Should we ask mall security for the hallway feed?" he said softly. Brooks gave him a brief look. "Later." Grace heard it. "Later, after the walk through the mall. Later, after the videos online. Later, after Lily's gift was left behind and her husband received a call no family should receive." Brooks asked for her identification. Grace handed it over with steady fingers. He read her name, address, and date of birth, then placed the card into his small notebook. Karen watched with a satisfaction she tried to hide behind. Concern. Melissa stared at the floor. The little blue star hair clip still sat beside the register, price tag facing up, $12, small enough to fit in a child's palm. Grace looked at it and felt something inside her ache quietly. "My daughter is turning 9, she said, not to anyone in particular. "I came here for that." No one answered. Brooks gestured toward the entrance. As Grace stepped onto the mall tile, the bright atrium opened around her, all glass railings, soft music, and weekend noise fading into a hush as people turned. She kept her chin level. She would not give Karen tears to display. She would not give Brooks panic to write down as guilt. Near the escalator, someone whispered, "What did she do?" Grace heard another voice answer, "She stole something." The lie traveled faster than footsteps. At the edge of the fountain, Brooks told her she would be processed downtown and allowed a phone call. Grace looked once through the boutique window. Karen had already picked up the star clip and moved it aside, clearing the counter as though Grace had never been there at all. By the time Grace reached the precinct, the rain had turned the city windows gray, smearing the downtown lights into long trembling lines across the glass. The patrol car had been quiet except for the radio murmuring codes she did not understand and the soft squeak of the windshield wipers moving back and forth like a clock counting down the minutes until her life became paperwork. She sat in the back with her purse sealed in a clear evidence bag on the front passenger floor, close enough to see, but too far away to touch. Her wedding ring felt heavier than usual, not because of shame, because it reminded her that somewhere across the city, Ethan still believed she was buying candles and frosting, still believed the worst problem in their home that afternoon was whether Lily would choose chocolate or strawberry for her birthday cake. When the car pulled behind the precinct, Officer Brooks stepped out first and spoke briefly with a desk sergeant near the side entrance. Grace waited until the rear door opened, then stepped carefully onto the wet pavement. No one raised a voice. No one needed to. The building did its own kind of speaking, with locked doors, pale walls, buzzing lights, and men who walked quickly because they were used to being obeyed. Inside, the air was too warm and too dry. A woman behind the front desk looked at Grace for half a second, then looked at the paperwork Brooks handed her. Name, address, date of birth, alleged retail theft, evidence recovered. Grace listened to the words attach themselves to her like labels on a box. Alleged sounded fair, but it did not feel fair when everyone said it with their eyes already finished. They took her shoelaces because it was procedure. They took her phone because it was procedure. They placed her purse in a metal cabinet because it was procedure. Each step had a name, and somehow the names made the wrongness feel official. Grace asked once if she could call her husband. The desk sergeant said after processing. She asked if they had requested the mall security footage. Brooks said it was being handled, but his tone had the thin, flat weight of a door closing. In a small waiting area near the back, she sat on a bench with her hands in her lap and watched a clock tick toward 3 in the afternoon. Lily would be home from her friend's house in 2 hours. Ethan would notice the missed calls by then. Maybe sooner. He always noticed patterns. He noticed when the kitchen light flickered before it went out. He noticed when Lily pretended to like oatmeal because she did not want to hurt Grace's feelings. He noticed when Grace said she was fine in the way that meant she was carrying something alone. Across the room, Brooks stood near a vending machine speaking with the younger officer who had asked about the hallway camera. His name tag read Palmer. Officer Palmer held a small notebook, his brow folded with quiet doubt. "I can call mall security now," he said. "They usually keep corridor footage for 30 days. Brooks took a paper cup from the machine and did not drink from it. "We have the item in her bag and the manager's statement. That is enough for intake. It would take 5 minutes, Palmer said. Brooks looked at him. 5 minutes is how you turn a clean misdemeanor into a circus. The woman was stopped with merchandise. Do not overcomplicate it. Grace heard every word. She turned her face toward the wall, not because she was afraid of them seeing her hurt, but because she needed a private place to hold herself together. On the wall opposite her, a faded poster showed a smiling child beside the words Community Trust. The paper had curled slightly at one corner. She stared at that corner until her breathing slowed. Community Trust. She wondered how many people had sat beneath that poster waiting for someone to trust them back. A little later, they moved her into the interview room from the beginning, the one with the steel table and the black camera in the corner. Brooks entered with the necklace sealed in plastic, the folder, and the form he wanted her to sign. He asked the same questions in different clothes. Why did she enter the store? Why did she try on the coat? Why was the necklace in her purse? Did she need money? Was she embarrassed? Did she understand that cooperation could make things easier? Grace answered each question with the same truth, and each time the truth seemed to irritate him more because it refused to become useful. I went there to buy my daughter a hair clip. I left my purse where the manager told me to leave it. I did not take the necklace. Please check the cameras. Brooks leaned back after the fourth request and rubbed his thumb along the edge of the folder. Mrs. Carter, innocent people usually want this resolved quickly. Grace looked at him then, really looked at him, past the badge, past the tired voice, past the practiced certainty. Innocent people want the truth, she said. Quick is what guilty people offer when they hope no one looks too closely. The room went still. Somewhere beyond the door, a phone rang twice and stopped. Brooks's face did not change much, but the skin around his eyes tightened. He stood, gathered the folder, and said he would give her a few minutes to think about whether she wanted to help herself. When the door closed, Grace sat alone with the buzzing light and the camera. Her reflection floated faintly on the dark glass above the observation window, pale and tired but not broken. She thought of Lily's missing tooth in the purse, the tiny plastic case now locked away like evidence of another life. Then the door opened again. Brooks stepped in with the desk phone, set it on the table, and slid it toward her. "One call," he said. Grace picked up the receiver with both hands and dialed Ethan's number from memory. When his voice answered, calm and warm and unaware, the strength she had been holding finally trembled at the edges. "Ethan," she said softly, "they said I stole something." On the other end, the silence changed shape. At the federal building 4 blocks from the precinct, Ethan Carter stood at the far end of a conference table covered with case files, store maps, printed receipts, and still images from security footage. Rain traced the tall windows behind him in thin silver lines, blurring the city into gray shapes and red brake lights. The room had been tense all afternoon, not loud, not chaotic, but focused in the way a room becomes focused when good people realize a quiet pattern has been hurting innocent families for a long time. On the wall monitor was a list of retail complaints from 3 different malls, all with the same strange rhythm. A customer entered a boutique. A small expensive item disappeared. A manager claimed to recover it from a purse or coat pocket. The customer was threatened with charges, then pressured to pay restitution before the case moved any further. Most paid because they were scared. Most stayed silent because shame is a cage that does not need a lock. Ethan had been studying those cases for weeks as part of a federal task force looking into organized retail fraud and evidence manipulation. He had seen names, dates, receipts, and store logos until they blurred together, but one name on the board kept pulling his attention back. Whitmore and Lane. It had appeared twice in older reports, both closed quickly, both marked as resolved when the accused customer paid a fee and signed an agreement not to sue. Ethan did not like clean endings that arrived too fast. He had built his career on noticing what people hoped no one would pause long enough to see. Across the table, Special Agent Marisol Vega pointed to a printed floor. "Plan of the mall. The blind spot is near the fitting room hallway," she said. "The old camera covers the front register, but not the shelf where customers leave bags." Ethan looked at the map, one hand resting near his coffee, untouched and cold. "Unless corporate installed the temporary unit after the last inventory complaint," he said. Vega glanced up. "They did. Yesterday morning." Ethan nodded slowly. "Then if anything happened today, it would be recorded." At that exact moment, his phone vibrated against the table. He almost ignored it. Work phones buzzed constantly in that building, and Ethan had trained himself not to reach for every sound like a nervous man. But this was his personal phone, face down beside a folder, and only 3 people called that number during meetings: Lily, Grace, and his mother. He turned it over and saw the precinct number. Not Grace. Not Lily. A public line. Something in him went still before he answered. "Carter," he said. For half a second, there was only the faint hiss of distance. Then Grace's voice, small and strained in a way he had never heard from her before. "Ethan," she said softly, "they said I stole something." No one in the conference room moved. Ethan did not raise his hand to quiet them. He did not need to. His face had changed just enough that every trained person at that table understood the air had shifted. Vega lowered the document in her hand. Another agent stopped typing. Rain tapped the glass with patient fingers. Ethan turned slightly away from the room, not because he wanted privacy, but because Grace deserved the full steadiness of his voice. "Where are you?" he asked. "Downtown precinct," she said. "They brought me from the mall." Whitmore and Lane. His eyes moved back to the board before his body did. The store name sat there in black marker, circled once that morning by his own hand. For a moment, the room seemed to narrow around those 3 words. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No," she said, but her breath caught at the edge. "Just scared. And angry." "Good," he said gently. "Hold on to angry. It tells you something wrong happened. Across from him, Vega's expression sharpened. Ethan placed one finger on the Whitmore and Lane file and kept his voice calm. Did they let you keep your phone? No. This is the station phone. Who is with you? Officer Brooks. Daniel Brooks. He wants me to write that I took it. He has not checked the camera. Ethan closed his eyes once, very briefly, not in defeat, but in control. When he opened them, the warmth in his face had turned into something quieter and harder, like a door locking from the inside. Listen to me, Grace. Do not sign anything. Do not explain beyond the truth you already gave. Say clearly that you want all store, mall, and body camera footage preserved. Can you do that? Yes. Her voice was steadier now because his was. And Ethan? I am here. Lily's hair clip is still at the store. It was $12. I was going to pay for it. That was the sentence that cut deepest, not because of the money, but because it carried the whole shape of her day inside it. A mother, a birthday, a tiny gift turned into a public accusation. Ethan looked down at the case files, then at the rain on the windows, then at the agents watching him with careful silence. I know, he said. I am coming. When the line clicked dead, he stood without rushing. Rushing wasted motion. Panic wasted breath. He slipped the phone into his coat pocket and picked up the Whitmore and Lane folder. Vega was already moving toward the door. Same store, she said. Same method, Ethan answered. Only this time, they chose the wrong woman to frame. He took his credentials from the table, the leather case dark against his palm, and walked out into the hallway as the federal building lights hummed above him. Outside, downtown traffic crawled through the rain, for blocks of wet pavement between him and Grace, but the distance already felt smaller than the truth moving toward it. The precinct did not grow louder when Ethan Carter entered. It grew careful. He came through the front doors with rain on the shoulders of his dark coat, and Special Agent Marisol Vega half a step behind him, both of them moving with the controlled pace of people who did not need volume to be taken seriously. The lobby was busy in the ordinary way of a downtown station on a rainy afternoon. A woman argued softly at the front desk about a parking citation. A delivery driver shook water from his cap near the vending machine. Somewhere behind the glass partition, a printer rattled, and a radio voice faded in and out like distant static. Ethan saw all of it in one sweep. Then his eyes found the hallway leading toward the interview rooms. Grace was back there. That fact steadied and sharpened him at the same time. At the desk, the sergeant looked up with the mild impatience of someone preparing to ask a visitor to take a number. Ethan opened his leather credentials case and placed it flat on the counter. Federal Bureau of Investigation, he said. I am Special Agent Ethan Carter. I am here regarding Grace Carter, the woman detained from Whitmore and Lane this afternoon. The sergeant's expression changed in layers. Confusion first, then recognition of the badge, then the uncomfortable awareness that the room had suddenly become smaller. Officer Palmer, standing near the report station, looked over sharply. Brooks emerged from the back hallway a second later, holding a paper cup of coffee he had still not tasted. For a moment, he did not understand what he was seeing. Then his gaze dropped to Ethan's credentials, moved to Vegas, and came back up more slowly. Special Agent Carter, Brooks said, choosing the words with care. Your wife is being questioned in connection with a retail theft complaint. Ethan did not blink. Then the questioning ends until all evidence is preserved and reviewed. Brooks straightened. We are following procedure. Ethan turned his head slightly toward him. Procedure starts with facts. It does not end with assumptions. The line was not loud, but it landed hard enough that Palmer looked down at his notebook. Vega stepped forward and placed a slim folder on the counter. We need immediate preservation of all store surveillance, mall corridor cameras, register footage, fitting room hallway footage, dispatch audio, and all body camera recordings from responding officers. The sergeant took the folder as though it had weight beyond paper. Brooks frowned. This is a local shoplifting case. No, Ethan said. It may be part of an ongoing federal investigation into fabricated retail complaints, coerced restitution payments, and possible evidence manipulation across multiple stores in the metro area. The words moved through the station like a cold draft. Palmer's face tightened, not with fear, but with the sudden relief of someone whose doubt had finally found a place to stand. Brooks looked from Ethan to Vega. Are you saying Whitmore and Lane is already under investigation? Vega answered before Ethan could. We are saying evidence from that store is relevant to an active matter. which means if any footage disappears after this moment, everyone who had access will need to explain why. A long silence followed. From somewhere down the hall, Grace's voice could not be heard, but Ethan felt the shape of her waiting. He imagined her sitting under the fluorescent light, hands folded, refusing to let a lie teach her how to sound guilty. His jaw tightened once, then eased. Anger was useful only if it obeyed him. He turned to Palmer. "You asked about mall security footage earlier." Palmer looked startled. Brooks glanced at him. Ethan continued. "Did you request it?" Palmer hesitated, then answered honestly. "No, sir. I suggested it. We had not done it yet." Brooks cut in. "We had recovered property and a direct complainant statement." Ethan looked at him then, not as a husband, but as an investigator trained to read the thin spaces between words. "You had a claim," he said. "You treated it as a conclusion." Brooks's face flushed, but he said nothing. Vega was already on her phone, speaking to a federal technical analyst at the mall security office. Her voice was low and efficient. "Preserve all feeds from 12:30 to 3:30. Fitting room hallway, central atrium, north entrance, parking garage level 3, and Whitmore and Lane internal cameras. No, do not route it through store management. Send it directly to the secure link I just provided." The sergeant looked at Brooks, then at Ethan. "We can bring Mrs. Carter out while this is being reviewed." Ethan's eyes softened for the first time since he entered. "Yes, do that." Brooks shifted as if he wanted to object, but the moment had moved beyond him. Palmer walked down the hallway and opened the interview room door. Grace appeared a few seconds later, tired but upright, her sweater slightly wrinkled, her face pale beneath the harsh station lights. She saw Ethan, and the breath she had been holding seemed to leave her all at once. He did not rush to her, not because he lacked feeling, but because he knew every person in the room was watching, waiting for emotion to make the truth look personal instead of factual. He walked to her with quiet restraint and stopped close enough for her to know he was there. "Are you all right?" he asked. She nodded once, but her eyes glistened. "I told them to check the cameras." "I know," he said. "They are checking them now." Vega's phone chimed. She looked at the screen, opened the secure link, and the first still image loaded. It showed the fitting room hallway from above, clear enough to see Grace's purse on the shelf, Melissa folding scarves, and Karen Whitmore stepping into the frame with one shoulder angled toward the mirror. Vega did not speak immediately. She expanded the image and advanced the footage by 5 seconds. Karen's hand moved from her blazer pocket to Grace's purse. The necklace appeared as a thin flash of silver before disappearing inside. The station seemed to lose sound. Brooks stared at the screen. Palmer whispered one word under his breath. Grace looked away, not because the truth hurt, but because being proven innocent should not have required watching the exact moment someone decided to harm her name. Ethan kept his eyes on the footage. "There it is," he said quietly. Not anger, not triumph, just truth, finally visible. The footage did not argue. It did not raise its voice, defend itself, or ask to be believed. It simply played. On the small screen in Special Agent Vega's hand, Karen Whitmore stood beside Grace's purse with the necklace hidden in her palm, her body angled just enough to block the view from the sales floor, but not enough to hide from the new camera above the fitting room hallway. 5 seconds of video undid 5 hours of accusation. Grace watched only once. After that, she lowered her eyes to her hands because seeing the truth did not erase the feeling of being surrounded by people who had preferred a lie when it was easier. Officer Brooks stood very still near the counter, his coffee untouched, his jaw tight, as if his own silence had become something he could not swallow. The desk sergeant took Vega's phone, watched the clip twice, then slowly turned toward Brooks. "Did you ask for this footage before intake?" Brooks opened his mouth, then closed it. Officer Palmer answered before anyone else could polish the moment into something softer. "I suggested mall security footage at the scene and again here. It was not requested." The words were quiet, but they carried through the room with the weight of a signed statement. Brooks looked at him, not with anger, but with the sharp disappointment of a man whose authority had expected loyalty from someone else's conscience. Ethan did not look away from Brooks. "My wife asked you to check the cameras. More than once." Brooks shifted. "Based on the evidence presented at the store, I believe there was probable cause." Ethan's voice stayed even. Belief is not a substitute for investigation. Vega's phone chimed again. Another file had arrived from the mall security office, then another, then a folder marked register and body camera. The station lights hummed overhead as the truth opened layer by layer. The mall corridor camera showed Grace walking into Whitmore and Lane with her purse closed and no necklace in her hands. The register camera showed the star-shaped hair clip placed on the counter, unpaid because the accusation interrupted the purchase. The body camera showed Grace asking for footage in the store, in the atrium, and again before entering the patrol car. It also recorded Karen saying the front camera was unreliable while avoiding any mention of the fitting room hallway. Ethan watched Brooks watching himself, and something in the room shifted from embarrassment into consequence. The sergeant called for Detective Laura Mitchell, who arrived from upstairs with reading glasses perched on her head and the measured expression of someone who had seen enough rushed stories to distrust neat ones. She reviewed the clips without speaking. Then she asked for the file on the 2 previous complaints from Whitmore and Lane. Brooks said they were not connected. Detective Mitchell looked at him over the top of the phone. Everything is connected until evidence proves it is not. Vega opened the federal folder and laid out the pattern. 3 customer complaints, 2 restitution agreements, 1 civil demand letter from a private loss prevention office, all tied to the same store, all resolved before outside review. Names had been corrected, dates matched, and payments traced through a vendor account that did not appear in the mall's official reporting system. Grace listened from beside Ethan, slowly realizing her nightmare had not begun with her. It had begun with other people who had been too frightened, too alone, or too exhausted to fight a machine built to make them feel guilty. Detective Mitchell turned to the sergeant. Release Mrs. Carter immediately. Remove the allegation from active processing pending full review. I want the store manager brought in for questioning, and I want preservation notices sent before anyone at that boutique touches a computer. The sergeant nodded and moved quickly. Brooks remained where he was. For the first time, Grace saw uncertainty on his face. Not regret yet, not fully, but the beginning of something he could not command away. The metal cabinet behind the desk was opened. Her purse was returned, still sealed, then documented and released. A clerk handed back her phone, her shoelaces, and the tiny plastic case holding Lily's lost tooth. Grace touched the case first. Not the phone, not the wallet, the tooth. That tiny piece of childhood, locked away for hours beneath a label that had never belonged to her. Ethan saw her fingers close around it, and his face softened, but he let the silence hold. Some hurts deserve space before comfort. 20 minutes later, Karen Whitmore was escorted into the precinct by mall security and a uniformed officer. Her cream blazer was still perfect, but her face had lost the smooth confidence it wore under boutique lights. She looked at Grace first, then Ethan, then the screen where her own hand hovered above Grace's purse in frozen clarity. I can explain, Karen said. Detective Mitchell folded her arms. Good. Start with why you planted merchandise in a customer's bag. Karen's eyes filled, but Grace felt no satisfaction. Only a tired sadness at how small cruelty looked once the lights came on. Brooks tried once more to speak, saying there had been pressure to move fast because retail theft calls were increasing. Detective Mitchell stopped him gently but firmly. Speed does not excuse ignoring evidence. Ethan finally turned to Grace. Are you ready to go home? Grace looked toward the precinct doors, beyond them to the rain, the parking garage, the unfinished birthday cake waiting in their kitchen. Not yet, she said softly. I need to buy my daughter a hair clip. They returned to the mall just before closing, when the rain had softened to mist and the bright Saturday crowd had thinned into scattered footsteps and tired music drifting from ceiling speakers. The atrium looked different now. Earlier, it had felt enormous. All glass railings and staring faces, a place where a lie could travel from one mouth to another before truth had even found its shoes. Now the tile reflected the overhead lights in pale gold strips, and the fountain near the escalator whispered over coins at the bottom as if nothing important had happened there. Grace walked beside Ethan with her purse held close, not out of fear, but out of the strange tenderness a person feels toward ordinary things after they have been taken away and returned. Special Agent Vega had stayed behind with Detective Mitchell to help secure store records. Officer Palmer had remained at the precinct giving a statement. Officer Brooks had been placed on administrative review pending the investigation, his badge no longer enough to protect the shortcuts he had called procedure. Karen Whitmore was still being questioned, and the boutique's computers had been sealed before anyone could delete a single receipt, message, or camera file. But Grace was not thinking about any of that when Whitmore and Lane came into view. She was thinking about Lily. The store lights were half dimmed, the gold sign still glowing above the entrance. A different employee stood behind the counter, an older woman with silver glasses and a careful, embarrassed expression. Melissa was near the children's display, folding ribbons with slow hands. When she saw Grace, her face changed. Not fear exactly, not relief. Something smaller and more painful. Shame, perhaps, when it finally stops hiding behind silence. Ethan paused at the entrance. Grace felt him looking at her, waiting for the smallest signal that she wanted to leave. She loved him for that. He could have cleared the room with a word. He could have turned the whole place into a federal scene again. Instead, he gave her the dignity of choosing her own next step. Grace walked in. The bell above the door chimed, soft and ordinary. Melissa stepped forward before anyone else could speak. "Mrs. Carter," she said, then stopped because the name carried too much. Grace looked at her. Melissa's eyes filled. "I should have said something earlier. I saw Ms. Whitmore near your purse. I did not see what she did, but I knew something was wrong." Grace did not answer right away. The store smelled the same as before, perfume and cedar hangers, but the sweetness no longer fooled her. She looked at the young woman, at the folded scarves between them, at the counter where the star-shaped hair clip had been left like an unfinished sentence. "Why did you stay quiet?" Grace asked. Melissa swallowed. "I was afraid of losing my job." The honesty was quiet, and because it was honest, it hurt. Grace nodded once. "Fear explains silence," she said. "It does not make it right." Melissa lowered her eyes. "No, ma'am. It does not." Ethan stood a few steps behind Grace, silent, his presence steady but not consuming the room. The older employee opened the glass tray and lifted out the little star clip with blue rhinestones. "We saved it," she said. "I am sorry." Grace almost smiled at the smallness of those words against the size of the day. Sorry could not rewind the phones in the atrium. It could not erase the interview room, the plastic evidence bag, the poster on the precinct wall, or the way people had looked at her when the lie was easier to believe. But sorry, when spoken with humility, could still be a beginning. Grace took out her wallet. The older woman shook her head. "There is no charge." Grace placed $12 on the counter anyway, then added the tax because she had checked the tag earlier and remembered the amount. "I came here to buy it," she said, "not to receive pity." The woman's eyes softened. She rang it up, hands trembling just enough for the receipt to flutter when it printed. Grace picked up the small pink bag and held it against her chest. Outside the store, Ethan finally reached for her hand. She let him take it. His thumb brushed gently over the marks the cuffs had left, not as a question, not as a wound to reopen, but as a promise that he had seen them and would not forget. They did not speak until they reached the parking garage. The air smelled of wet concrete and gasoline, and somewhere on the lower level, a car alarm chirped once before falling silent. Grace looked out over the city through the open side of level 3. Boston shimmered under rain and traffic lights, imperfect and alive. Ethan opened the passenger door, then stopped. "Are you ready to go home now?" he asked. Grace looked down at the pink bag in her hands. For a moment, she saw Lily's gap-toothed smile, birthday candles, strawberry frosting, the little blue notebook still waiting at another store for another day. "Yes," she said. "I am ready." When they reached the house, Lily ran to the door in socks, her hair messy, her face bright with questions. Grace knelt and handed her the bag. Lily opened it, gasped, and clipped the blue star into her hair right there in the hallway mirror. It sparkled under the warm porch light. Ethan stood behind them, one hand resting on the doorframe, watching the two people he loved breathe inside the safety of home. Grace did not tell Lily everything that night. Not yet. Some truths have to be given in pieces gentle enough for a child to hold. Instead, she helped light 9 candles on a strawberry cake, saved the tiny tooth for the scrapbook, and sat between her husband and daughter while rain tapped softly against the windows. Later, after Lily fell asleep with the star still in her hair, Grace stood in the quiet kitchen washing frosting from a plate. Ethan came beside her, took the plate from her hands, and turned off the faucet. The house settled around them, warm and still. No applause, no speeches, just the sound of rain, the glow of the stove clock, and the deep, Steady silence of a name returned clean.